When they hear events, they see, people ask, when do we pick up the badge scanner? And I'm like, there's no badge scanner. You're going to meet everyone in the room. And if you don't, that's on you, because that's what we're there to do. Everyone is there to connect.
Welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show, the podcast for B2B healthcare marketers who want to build pipeline. I'm your host, Adam Turinas. I'm the CEO of HealthLaunchpad, the pipeline growth company for B2B healthcare. Today, we're kicking off a two-part series we're calling The Intimacy Shift. It's a close look at why healthcare technology marketers are pulling budget away from massive trade shows and putting that budget into smaller, curated, community-driven events. Part 1 is called Curated, Not Crowded, and my guest is Megan Antonelli, CEO of HealthIMPACT. Megan's been running some of the most sought-after C-suite gatherings in healthcare technology for over a decade. We're going to get into how she builds a room that executives will fly across the country for. And we'll also get into why Megan says she's proud to say that HealthIMPACT is pay to play. She's also going to go into why marketing leaders are ready to rethink their event strategy. And do come back for part 2 next week, where we'll be joined by Mike Mosquito and Maureen Nylin from the Buzz Podcast Network. They take everything Megan's going to set up here about building the right room and show us what actually has to happen once the people are in it. So if today is about the strategy behind curation, the next episode is about the human experience that makes curation worth doing it in the first place. Before we get into it, if you're a regular listener, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the button so that you don't miss part 2 and other future episodes. And a big thank you to our friends at Healthcare Now Radio for getting this show out to the world, especially Roberta and Carol, who make it all happen behind the scenes. Okay, let's get on with it and meet Megan. So Megan, you've got a seat almost nobody in marketing has, and they give their back teeth to have. So you're in the rooms with CIOs, CMIOs, and CFOs. Anybody who doesn't know about you and about HealthIMPACT, tell us the story.
Yeah. Well, it's funny reading your background, Adam. And first, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's so great to be here. I love listening. I love being part of the Healthcare Now Radio network with you. So, we too had been an events company for 10 years before the pandemic, right? We launched HealthIMPACT Live in 2011. And when the pandemic came around, we went very virtual very quickly, pivoted immediately, had a number of events planned for HIMSS that we took online and onto Zoom. And so started the podcast and started our kind of virtual platform then. But up until that point, and now as things are continuing, we've really focused on smaller, mid-size events. We used to run them in all the sort of major metros in the country. And now we really just run HealthIMPACT Fall Forum in New York. And then we do a winter event kind of January, February, also in New York. And then the occasional, maybe we'll do Houston, maybe we'll do Chicago, but 200, 300 C-suite executives, very hospital focused, in a really curated room. And then we have dinners. So it was part of our Changemaker series. We have dinners at Health and HIMSS and Vive. And then we've just started, which has been super fun to kind of bring back, as these operator tables dinners, more like 12 to 15 seats at the table in those major metros to kind of, get to know our audience once again and hear what things are happening. Because, healthcare has always been very local. And so each of those markets it's always shocking to me how kind of different they are and what makes them tick.
So dumb question. What do you mean by an operator?
I think the way that we define it is the hospital leaders, right? CIO, CMIO, the ones who are making it happen, at the healthcare system.
Now, so you've been at this for 10 years, or is it more like 15 years now?
Let's go with 10. I like right. 10.
Okay.
But really 20. But 10 is good.
But before that, you worked for big guys like Informa, didn't you? And this sort of So the journey, like the sort of what made you say there's an opportunity here?
Well, yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, back in the day, 20 years ago, really, I started at what was IIR and became Informa, and it was all about education. It was a new bill is passed, a new regulation, and you've got to put together a conference that really gives these, executives the content they need to work in that environment. So whether it was HIPAA or whether it was Medicare Advantage, those were the types of events we were doing, and they were very content focused. And as the market changed, I mean, and really what happened when Informa had acquired IIR, there was a market change that was happening where we were shifting from conferences to trade shows. And there was this huge push towards the trade show model. And I loved it. It was great. It was very exciting to see these sort of big builds and big rooms and, so much as possible. And they serve an incredible purpose. But I think after doing that for as many years as I did, I realized the value of the small room and kind of what those connections would bring and the value of those conversations. And I think in some ways, the education and the content was always what I was about. So when we launched, we called it Purpose Events because, I wanted the events to really be meaningful and meaningful outside of just the networking and the marketing, but meaningful because they could really move the conversation and move the industry forward. And healthcare has always just been the area, my lane and my passion, so that it just kind of happened naturally that way.
When you raise the anchor from like a big company and you've had all that security of a salary and benefits and all the sort of stuff that goes with it, that sort of makes you kind of put up with the general crap of working for big corporations. They're not all big corporations, but some big corporations. A lot of us have had those frustrations, I'm sure. It's a big risk and it's a pretty scary jump for most people. So tell us about that transition.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I haven't thought about it too much. I mean, I think in a way, as I said, it was just it was so natural. And because I had worked in healthcare for so many years, I had such an incredible network of people that had been coming to my events that, on a pretty large scale, to kind of build the highly curated event where I got to pick, say, 50 to 75 speakers and attendees, and then kind of build to that 200 of the audience. I mean, at the time when we started, it was literally getting on the phone, calling them saying, hey, will you come? Is there anybody else in your organization, who wants to come? What should it be about? And, I mean, I just loved it. So it worked. And at that time, we had actually launched HealthIMPACT as part of a larger company. And then I kind of acquired it and took it over. So I will say I had a little bit of a help in that there was a foundation to build on where we were just kind of picking it up from there. But that
It's
network, there have been so many people that have supported me who had, spoken at the first HealthIMPACT that still continue to come to them, and they were folks that I met when I was working at World Congress and Informa many, many years ago.
I mean, that is honestly the perfect way to start a business where you've got a clear vision, you can see the gap in the market, you can see the need, you've got the relationships, you've got the experience, you know exactly how to do it, and then a foundation on top of that. It's like, that's just ideal. So that's the reason why I bring it up is I've started several businesses and most of them have not been remotely successful, and partly because I didn't start with that clarity and certainly without the relationships. But it does take, I think people who've not started their own business don't really understand until they've done it,
Hmm.
the
Well,
the
those
guts it
relationships
takes to do
matter,
it. Yeah, exactly.
especially when
Well,
a
relation.
pandemic rolls around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's get on to talk about the events, small events, whether it's the 300 executive conferences or the dinners, they're curated, right? I mean, what's the mechanism for getting the right people in the room?
Yeah, I mean, I think, going back to my content days, you're starting with the problem, and then the curation comes after that. So, knowing who you want to have in that room, knowing what their problems are, and then building the content and the environment around that, and that's changed, I mean, it's changed over the years. So, when we first launched, we were very much about bringing the CIO in the room with the CMIO for EHR implementation and meaningful use. I mean, our tagline was from meaningful use to meaningful outcomes, because everybody was skeptical about all the check boxes they had to check. And it was very much the CFO and the CIO who are at the table and not as much the CMIO. And the problem, the friction, was physician adoption. And so that's really what Health Impact was born of. And over the last 10, 15 years, those problems have changed. Who needs to be in the room has changed. And so we've changed the program about it. And so sometimes we'll hear things like, oh, I didn't know what Health Impact was about, or it's broad and what does it cover? And I think part of that is because by design, we made it broad so that we could cover what the problem of the day is and bring the group together that needs to be. Now, CIOs have always sort of been that core of where that problem or pain points begin. But now we are very much, focused on bringing in the CMIO and the CNIO and the chief nursing officers and those who are having to make the decisions and really, deal with the workflow changes that all of this technology brings about.
Hey, it's Adam here. Here's the thing about B2B healthcare marketing. It's not like marketing anything else. The sales cycles are longer, the buying committees are more complex, and credibility isn't optional. It's the entry price. And that's exactly why Health Launchpad exists. We combine deep healthcare industry expertise with a proven approach to go-to-market strategy that helps health tech and health services companies build pipeline that actually converts, not just leads that sit around in a CRM. So whether you're refining your ICP, building an account-based approach, or just making sure your message actually lands with a CIO or a CMIO, we've done this for dozens of healthcare technology companies for the last 7 years. So if your pipeline needs a second look, that's exactly the kind of challenge we love solving. You can find out more about us at healthlaunchpad.com. Now, back to Megan. So we always think about the provider market is that everybody says, oh, there's 6,000 hospitals. But yeah, but actually it's more like 1,500 to 2,000 corporate companies, organizations, right? And so that probably means that there are maybe a couple of thousand CIOs out there. So if you're getting, I'm sure that not all 300 of the attendees are CIOs, but even if you're getting 150, you're getting 5% of the market to show up. And these people, first of all, they have a tough time justifying their travel these days. And then they've got 75 other events they could be going to. How do you get them to go, yeah, I need to be at this event?
Again, it goes back to the relationships, but I think it also goes back to trust, right? It is that they trust in that it will be a good use of their time, and that we're going to do everything to make it a good use of their time. I credit our moderator, Shaw, the chair of Health Impact, as someone who, no matter the prep, no matter the who on the stage, makes every conversation meaningful and valuable. He can just cut through the BS, as we say, and get to, what matters for the people in the room, and we do a lot of assessments to figure out, who is in the room. Obviously, we do a lot of curation to get those people in the room. But I'd say I'm also kind of relentless. I mean, I don't stop. I just email people and call people and ask them to come all day long. So there's a certain amount of persistence that it takes to get people there.
And the vendors. So explain for those who don't know, what's the role of the vendors in this? How do they get involved?
Yeah. I say to our friend John Lynn a lot, particularly at This Way, is that I am proud to be pay to play. I don't think there's anything wrong with pay to play as long as it's done right and well. And as long as you've coached and kind of trained your partners to follow the rules, right? And that, creating that sort of scarcity and that right ratio is incredibly important. And if they don't understand that that is important, then they're not coming to the right room. And, if they don't understand that it's about, kind of teaching and not preaching and about, partnering and not selling, then again, it's not the right room. So we've had, a lot of partners who, come in. A lot of the times the best partners are those who are incredibly good at what they do and a little bit new to healthcare. And so that's like just a great place to be in training them and in helping them really build relationships really quickly in healthcare. So, but it's about kind of getting them to understand that selling and pitching kind of, it takes the air out of the room.
That sounds simple and intuitive, but it's surprisingly challenging. I mean, having run my own health tech company and had a board that was fairly inexperienced in healthcare, and even the more experienced ones, they still were all over me to saying, why aren't these deals moving faster? Why aren't you getting more opportunities? And it's just like, well, because it's healthcare. It just takes a while. You can't make it move any faster than it's going to. And you can't, and you have to build a reputation before anybody will trust you to do business with you. And so I can expect, it's interesting that with the newer one, that are most likely going to be venture backed, is that they've got so much pressure on them to grow the pipeline. And so I can imagine it's not that easy, sometimes not that easy to manage, to sort of like say, you got to calm down a bit there, you know.
Yeah, no, and it's just their mentality. I mean, when they hear events, they see, people ask, when do we pick up the badge scanner to it? And I'm like, there's no badge scanner. You're going to meet everyone in the room. And if you don't, that's on you, because that's what we're there to do. Everyone is there to connect, and you don't need a scanner. It's not about the cards collected, but it's hard to change that perception. And also what happens, of course, is you have that conversation with, there's many layers to this, in terms of marketing versus sales versus, the head of healthcare, right? So you've got those groups, and they, the head of healthcare generally understands healthcare. They know it, they get it. The marketing person can be, healthcare and not healthcare specific. And so, what works in one, they apply it here. The metrics, they want to measure their success. And I get that, and certainly we do our best to provide the leads and kind of be able to give them their benchmarks, but remind them that the best thing to walk away from is a real conversation about their product, or, really even more so about what their product needs to be, right? The future of the product. So, it isn't where you come to get your 10 leads, but to sort of deepen that relationship so that you're on the roadmap in 6 months to a year to 5 years.
So for your most successful vendors, the successful I mean is that the ones where you've got the most successful relationship with them and they get the most out of it, what would they say is the ROI of the relationship versus somebody who does it for a bit and then says, yeah, it just wasn't for us?
I think the ones that stay understand the ROI is in the relationship, and, that FaceTime. We have a lot of partners who come to meet with their partners. We're doing the work to put the people you want in that room, and we will get them there. And whether it's your existing partners that you want a little extra FaceTime with, or you want to hear them and have that, sort of context of, what questions are they asking when they're, faced with these choices and this conversation, but they understand that relationship and that long-term value is really what the ROI is. Those who think, oh, we're going to get 1,500 more names for the CRM,
Not for them.
they're not.
Yeah.
They're not in the right place.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier on, which is content. And that means so many different things, but what it made me think of is that when I ran a software company, I won't tell you who the organization is. There's a short list of companies that are a bit like this, and they would put together these curated events, and they were hard selling on the vendors. They'd make you feel bad about not being there. They're very effective at doing that. But I felt we did it a couple of times. It didn't work for us, but there were plenty of vendors that were there who said, actually, it works really well for them. Great. But the thing that I thought was most lacking was the content was not good. It felt like it was all very shiny and superficial, but actually the discussions that we're having were sort of really uninsightful and not well moderated. And I wasn't convinced that there was any content coming out of it. So what do you do to make sure that the content, the experience is memorable?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And I think now with all the tools that there are to kind of generate conversations and kind of topics and session descriptions, it's a really thoughtful process. And I think the content around where the content needs to be, you can't just sort of scan the trades and scan, what's happening on Becker's to kind of come up with topics, because if they needed that, it's there. Right. So you have to understand the market enough, and you have to understand the challenges that they're facing enough to know, the question they're not asking, the problem they're not surfacing. to drive those questions, right? And, I will credit Shahid and in terms of his ability to kind of take those questions and kind of run with it. But it is understanding, really where they are. I mean, I don't think people, certainly those who are new to healthcare, I see it a lot with salespeople, even have any comprehension of how smart a C-suite person at a health system is. I mean, many are clinicians, many have seen, more than we'll ever see in our lifetimes. And then they're applying, the most advanced technology to operationalize and create efficiencies. And, they're super smart. And to sort of give them schlock or AI slop, even if it's just to prepare them, they can see through it and then they know what they're there for. So, it really is about pushing the needle to drive the conversation in healthcare forward. And that is through identifying the problems that they are really facing and knowing that market that well. And I see a lot of conference companies with junior conference teams who, they're just kind of putting what's out there, trying to be fun, trying to be sexy. It's a lot of that. And that's okay in a for a big trade show. It's totally fine. You're all there to kind of get on the stage and talk about, for the sound bites of it. But when you're there and you want to take 6 hours of a C-suite's time to, they are going to be on the stage and then they're going to spend the rest of the day there, it's got to be pretty good content.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting the way, your point about how smart they are, because, there aren't that many organizations where the CIO, who's essentially an internal service person, right, is serving the needs of the smartest kids that went to in your high school, who were smartest people in college. And, it's maybe some physicians might be accused of having a bit of an ego too. So they have to be,
Sure.
the CIO and their team have to be super smart.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough customer
It
to
is.
serve. I'm curious actually, are you noticing, over the last decade or so, have you noticing a change in the CIOs and what they want out of these types of events and what they want out of the vendors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it varies. And I think I've seen a change even in the last couple of years, right? And it changes with the cycle of what's going on, and it's sort of shoppers, builders to buyers, right? In terms of what they're looking for and what's available, and healthcare is super interesting because it's inherently, again, very smart, not always competitive, right? Much more collaborative. There are certain states and regions where you have a healthy competition, but they're much more collaborative and academic than your typical buyer of technology software, right? And so but I do think in terms of one of the bigger changes is that need to sort of be seen as the innovator has gone away a little bit. I think there was a very big push to be like the most innovative. And now it's like the most responsible, and
Right.
I think that's different than what it was.
That's a very interesting observation, particularly as AI adoption is obviously sort of like high, if not the number one thing on the agenda, it's probably number two. But it's not AI for innovation's sake, it's practical applications. How can we help it to improve patient experience? How can we help it to improve physician satisfaction? How can we improve it to reduce costs and increase revenues? So I think that's very interesting. One thing that I've had this conversation with several marketers is that as it's easier through the LLMs to do research and to gather more information, the amount of time that the buyers spend sort of in the dark funnel, right, before they pop up and actually will speak to everybody is getting longer and they're even harder to reach. But the counter to that is that in many regards, it makes events even more important because that's where they're there for validation and to get questions answered. So I'm just wondering if that's the theory that I'm hearing there. I'm just wondering if you're seeing
Yeah.
anything like that.
I think that so the marketing copy for the companies are very similar. And then as they come to these events or they look at what events to go to, they learn from their peers. They want to know, what is this person using? What is proven, right? I mean, it's trust. It's also relationship and reputation, right? And just like we hear all the time, no one ever got fired for implementing Epic. AI is not there yet. And there's a lot of different players and knowing who's going to be the player in all of this. And whether that's AI automation or virtual nursing, virtual hospital at home software, remote patient monitoring, the verdict or the jury is still out on who's going to be the biggest and best player there. But knowing that your friend over at Northwell has implemented it, that makes a big difference. And those conversations are what happen, right? And that's where, decisions end up being made, and also seeing them on the stage talking about that, which is a lot of what we do, makes a difference. And I think, yes, AI has made that much more important. But I would go so far to say, again, because these folks are as smart as they weren't making too many decisions without talking to a friend first anyway, And so amount of information that's out there, the ability to evaluate it, whether it's through, class or other evaluation tools are there. But that word of mouth, what was the biggest problem when you implemented it? Why did you implement it? How did you get your buy-in from, the multiple parts of the organization? That's what people are struggling with right now. And I think that's what, kind of FaceTime at events, smaller events does.
Is that the main reason, or maybe the number two reason why executives will say, I'm going to give up 3 or 4 days to, fly to New York or wherever it is to be at your event?
I think so. I mean, I think it's the main reason. I think there's also, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. So job security being, kind of first to market on some things, but also, the more people the more people you know. And so I wouldn't, I don't discount the importance of just networking in general, no matter what side of the market you're on. And I think there's a lot of, smart C-suite executives who understand that. And people change sides all the time. Every time a CIO leaves and goes to a vendor, they say, oh, I'm going to the dark side. Well, they go and they come back and they go and they come back. So, meeting people in intimate settings creates relationships that last. And no matter the AI or the tools or the time of year, that I think is kind of people's priority, is that community. And I think we have done a really good job at HealthIMPACT of creating that community, of learning, of professional development, even though it's kind of is a little bit secondary.
Yeah. Okay. So closing question for you. If a health tech marketing leader listening to this is thinking, we really need to rethink our event strategy, or we need to reprioritize the way that we're deploying our budget, what's the first thing that they should do?
It goes back to kind of where you focus the most, right? Which is around account-based marketing and management, and kind of looking at, who are your best customers and who's like them that you're going to be able to serve, and kind of coming up with, not the events, but the who of who you want to meet, and picking those accounts and figuring out where they're going to be or what partner is going to help you get them there, because it almost has to be that methodical now, because no one's answering email. No one's reading email, certainly not anyone human. So you've got to, really figure out a way that you're getting in their phone and in front of them, as much as you can. And the only way to do that is to really know who you want to reach, and why. Figure out their why and get in front of them.
Megan, thank you. I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. Really appreciate what you do. And I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Adam. It's a pleasure. And I love what you do. And thank you for doing it and having me on the show.
All right. Let's wrap up part 1 of the intimacy shift. Here's what stood out to me from what Megan's had to say. Number 1, curation starts with the problem, not the guest list. Megan builds every event around the specific pain point the room needs solved, not just who's available to speak. Number 2, pay to play isn't a dirty word if it's done right. The vendors who win are the ones who coach their teams to teach, not pitch. Number 3, the real ROI for vendors isn't the leads collected, it's the long-term relationships built over years, not a single event. Number 4, content has to earn the C-suite 6 hours. Generic trend topics don't cut it with an audience this sharp. Number 5, if you're rethinking your event budget, Megan's advice is to start with an account-based approach. Know exactly who you want in the room before you decide what the room is. If this got you thinking differently about your event strategy, share this episode with someone on your team or a colleague in the industry who you think might benefit from listening to it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you catch part 2, where we go inside the room with Mike Mosquito and Maureen Nylin, who are going to talk about exactly what it takes to make these events feel really human. I'm Adam Turinas, and I'll see you on the next one.